Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to Electronic Health Records on Azure, or EHR for short. We have an exciting schedule planned for you today. We'll start off with an introduction about the participants. From there, we will be giving a brief introduction and background on Sapphire Health. After Sapphire Health's introduction, we will be diving into two main topics. First, we'll be providing a solutions overview. This will be diving into Epic Cloud Read Only in Azure and Epic Alternate Production in Azure as well. Following, we will be reviewing some case studies from each solution, one from Samaritan Health and one from Vancouver Clinic. Then lastly, we will have time for our Q&A. As for the participants, my name is Jonathan Hobbs, and I will be moderating this webinar. Thanks so much for having me. It's a great privilege to be here. As for our presenters, we are joined by Tyler Jordan, the Director of Cloud Solutions at Sapphire Health, and Austin Park, the CEO of Sapphire Health. From there, I'll be passing it over to Austin Park. The floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. Before we get started, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk and tell you a little bit about Sapphire Health and some of the background. So we are a specialty services company. We're founded about 8 years ago in 2015. As I mentioned, we're a highly specialized technical services company that focus on just the technical elements of complex Epic migrations. Now, when we started initially, we focused on Unix to Linux migrations resulting from acquisitions or divestitures. But over the last few years, once Azure and other hyperscale environments became a viable platform for Epic, we started working with healthcare organizations throughout the US and Canada markets to help them migrate their Epic workloads into the cloud. Now, today, we want to talk to you a little bit about some of the common path that some of the early healthcare adopters have been able to leverage in moving their Epic environments to Azure. We want to discuss a few specific use cases, as Jonathan mentioned, and hopefully answer some of the questions that you might have. Now, before we get started, I wanted to talk about the path to cloud and the typical cloud adoption practice maturity that most organizations will have. Now, I think most organizations are looking at this as part of their overall digital transformation strategy. Now, we used to think of digital as just moving from paper to electronic records. But today, it's about creating a platform with scalable infrastructure, applications, and data that can return the maximum value to the organization. So I think at least on some level, hyperscale integration has to be a factor of that overall digital transformation. So getting a solid foundation for that cloud hyperscale environment is also very important, and it really starts with the cloud landing zone, which Tyler is going to be talking about a little bit more from a technical perspective. Now, in most healthcare organizations, including almost every healthcare organization that we work with as a Epic specialty technical migration organization, moving your Epic environment to the cloud is a very big deal for most organizations. It's probably arguably the most important workload that healthcare organizations have today. So healthcare organizations are looking at lots of different approaches to making that happen and looking at it from different perspectives to make sure not only that they get the benefit, but they do so in a way that's going to be resilient, that's going to safeguard against possible errors, and make sure that they don't have any interruption in their environments. The other thing that's a big concern for most organizations is the co-travelers, or all the applications that work with Epic. In most healthcare organizations, we're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of applications that integrate and work with Epic. And these co-travelers might actually ultimately become a bigger impact in how we leverage cloud resources. But that'll be a discussion for another day, because today we're going to focus on the Epic migrations specifically. Now, I should mention also one of the most important things to consider as part of this cloud journey is making sure that once we get our key workloads into Azure, that we have a way to manage it properly, that we have a way to adapt and leverage some of the automation and some of the capabilities that come to life as a result of having our workloads in a scalable environment like Azure. So automation, as well as concepts like infrastructure as a code, becomes an important part of this, part of the overall discussion. Speaking specifically about Epic, now there are 4 approaches to how we move Epic into the cloud. needless to say, because of the, I guess, the criticality of Epic workloads, most organizations are not going to start with production. And that's what we've seen was the kind of the early adopters. In most cases, they'll start with one of the other three strategies, starting with non-production environments such as training or DR or cloud read-only. Most organizations, I think, early on thought that moving non-production environments like ACE training environments was the way to go, so that their IT departments can get some experience and some lessons learned from moving these environments was not having a big impact to the organization. And while that's a perfectly valid approach, the downside to it is that it doesn't necessarily return a lot of value back to the organization. So today we're going to be talking about the two other approaches to cloud adoption for Epic workloads that people have been taking advantage of. One is alternate production, because it has the potential to have some significant cost savings with the ability to scale up and scale down and to take advantage of just what we need when we need it through what Tyler is going to call a pilot light approach, as well as a cloud read-only solution, which is specifically designed to combat some of the concerns around cyber attacks with ransomware attacks. So right now, I'll turn it over to Tyler.
Thanks, Austin. So to start off with, I want to talk a little bit about the cloud landing zone. I think for a lot of organizations, just getting started can be the hardest part about moving anything up into Azure or any cloud provider. So the cloud landing zone kind of provides that foundational level building block that then you can actually put your workloads on. It's a lot easier than trying to formulate this whole complex strategy from scratch, and instead gives you that foundational building blocks for governance, networking, security, and identity and access management in order to make sure that your organization is set up for success. The Azure Landing Zone provides this structure approach so that you can quickly leverage the full potential of the cloud computing while adhering to normal best practices and compliance requirements. So for example, on the governance side, the landing zone allows you to really easily establish policies, controls, and procedures to manage your Azure resources effectively. This involves defining the roles and responsibilities and helps you implement compliance standards to make sure that the resources that you build within Azure are HIPAA compliant and compliant in whatever other ways that may be required by your local government. It also provides that foundational networking building block so that you can really quickly get your on-premise organization linked up with your Azure environment, either via a VPN or an express route. This designs that network infrastructure so that you can connect your on-premise data centers with Azure resources securely. On the IAM side, or Identity and Access Management side, the Cloud Landing Zone sets up the authentication and authorization mechanisms to control the access to those resources. It involves implementing things like Azure Active Directory, role-based access control, and multi-factor authentication while managing identity lifecycles. Finally, on the security side, the Cloud Landing Zone implements measures that help protect your Azure resources and data from threats and vulnerabilities foundationally. This includes configuring the network security groups, so basically the ports and source IPs that are allowed into your different resources. It also forces you to implement encryption and monitoring for suspicious activities. All in all, to say, while it is easy to get started in Azure just by making a subscription and building resources, the Cloud Landing Zone sets your organization up for success at the very beginning. So talking a little bit more about the actual Epic solutions that we see a lot of organizations do, the first one is Epic Cloud Read Only. So the number one reason for downtime for healthcare organizations is actually security. Ransomware is the largest risk for an extended outage at healthcare organizations because not only do they often target your primary data center, they also will often affect the alternate production data center. So the Cloud Read Only is a secure, isolated environment that's designed to supplement your normal business continuity features in the event where both production and alternate production are affected, such as something due to a ransomware attack. The Epic Cloud Read Only consists of a read-only replica of your operational database, as well as a limited subset of web and service servers being interconnected in hyperspace web, so that your users can access this environment over the public internet. This would be via Haiku Canto, so your users' mobile devices, or by accessing hyperspace web via Chrome or Edge. So you may be wondering, why is it that this is the first starting point for a lot of organizations. And the reason why is that this is generally a net new environment. Most organizations don't already have a cloud read-only environment. And so by starting with that in Azure, they get the opportunity to really gain experience and build in the Azure space while not affecting any existing production or even alternate production resources. Sorry. Additionally, this causes, sorry, one sec. Finally, on the cybersecurity front, this can provide savings for your organization on insurance premiums by making sure that your resources are available in an isolated third-party offsite environment and can honestly pay for itself. Next, we have the alternate production. So a lot of organizations choose to move their alternate production from an on-premise or alternate data center where they physically control the resources up to Azure. Now, the reason why you may want to do this is severalfold. A lot of organizations that already have alternate production in a third-party on-prem data center, they may not have a lot of confidence in that solution. They might not be failing over it very frequently, or they may not even know that they have enough capacity. Part of the problem with controlling your own data centers is that you have to buy the servers in advance, and a lot of times they just sit there not doing anything unless you're doing a planned failover or an unplanned failover. So when you buy these resources, not only are they quickly going out of date and providing slower response times, they're accumulating costs without providing any value. The real benefit to putting your alternate production in Azure, or one of the main benefits, is that you can implement a pilot light approach. What this means is you have enough servers on for your alternate production environment where you can monitor it and ensure that it's available and that you're able to cut over when you need to, but you're not running hundreds of servers for no reasons that are just sitting there. And then you have a procedure during the event of a planned failover or an unplanned failover to actually activate your alternate production environment and spin up the servers that you need for the capacity. This way, you're not spending tons of money on servers that are just sitting there. You're spending the base amount for that pilot light approach. And then during the event of activation, you the increased spend just for that short period of time where you're actually using the environment. Finally, you can also ensure that you're going to have good performance from your alternate production data center. You're not going to have some alternate data center that has your leftover servers that maybe got moved from your production data center. Instead, you're going to have servers that you're implementing the latest processors as different SKUs are released within the Azure environment. And in fact, a lot of organizations might find that if their production data center isn't having the latest processors, their alternate production within Azure might actually have better performance just due to having newer hardware. So in conclusion, migrating alternate production is a no-brainer for a lot of organizations to make sure that they can reduce costs and ensure performance and availability when otherwise their current existing alternate production environment may not be able to do so. So finally, I'd like to turn it over back over to Austin to give a couple of specific case studies of actual organizations that have gone through this cloud journey.
Thanks, Tyler. Well, actually, the first organization that I'd like to discuss is Vancouver Clinic. I believe this is a project that you, Tyler, was actually led this project as the Director of Cloud Operations, Cloud Solutions and Operations. So it was a cloud read-only solution that we implemented for Vancouver Clinic. As you mentioned, it was specifically to address the security concerns. And the project involved having a net new environment, a cloud read-only environment implemented in Azure, and setting up a mirror between their production environment and that cloud read-only environment and having it synced. Some of the benefits that they received is one, they have an environment that they can activate. And as I understand that they're able to activate this within minutes. Is that correct, Tyler?
That's correct. The only thing that they need to do to turn it on is actually make sure that their environment becomes accessible from the internet, and it's an under 10-minute time from activation to accessibility.
Yep. And we've done several cloud read-only environments, and I think one of the consistent things that we found is that the activation process for everyone is exactly as you said, just severing the network connection and then activating the internet connection, the outbound connection coming to the CRO environment. And as a result, most organizations are able to do that in under 10 minutes. The other thing that actually they were able to get out of this was that because it's a constant replication of their production environment, their recovery point is right up to the minute of failure when they activate. So should they lose their production environment as part of the ransomware attack or get encrypted, and they have to go back to backups to restore, they could actually use the journal files that are part of the read-only environment to reconstitute that epic environment, reducing their recovery point objective. Is there anything specific about that you'd want the audience to know, Tyler?
Well, the main challenge that organizations have with Cloud Read Only is just getting that mirror set up, because as I mentioned before, this is an isolated environment that is, other than the mirror, just communicating amongst itself. So while not having a lot of complexity, you're really getting a lot of value out of this.
Sure. How long did the project take?
Total, it took 8 weeks, and that includes some of the discovery and the network build out where we had to get the connection for the mirror from the VPN on-prem to Azure.
Yeah. So an 8-week project, really, for an epic project from start to finish, is really incredible. That's So I want to take us to the next case study. This case study is with Samaritan Health Services, and I believe you were also the project lead for this project as well. Their first foray into the cloud was their alternate production environment, and they had some specific needs that they had. One of which was they wanted to be able to defray the costs associated with purchasing all new hardware for their alternate production environment. And so we needed to get this environment up in Azure so that they wouldn't have to make purchases for that. They did eventually actually decide to move their production environment as well, because what they realized once they did that is that they actually got better performance from the cloud environment than they were getting on-prem. It was far less exception rates, and it was something that they actually really benefited from. Now, there were some earlier challenges with networking and some of the other aspects. Is there anything that you can share regarding that, Tyler?
Also, with a full alternate production or production migration, usually the biggest challenges is with those third parties, the outside interfaces that you might need to communicate with. There's a lot of discovery on that front where you need to make sure that you're accounting for anything that your Azure environment may be connecting to that is outside of Azure. And then additionally, anything that might be hard-coded by IP. There are some modalities out there that, especially in radiology, that could be older and out of date, that may have a hard-coded IP for the Epic database that needs to be found and accounted for to be able to handle that transition.
Gotcha. So, they've completed this project both for their alternate production and production. And, the comments back from Samaritan overall from both operations and IT has been fantastic. They've had a positive experience. They've had to work through some of the early adopter kind of wrinkles, but today they have an environment that allows them to be, and using specifically the words from their CIO, Sunny Sapphire. Okay, actually, we'll have to cut that out and redo. But specifically from their CIO, they said, our migration path to the cloud, and more specifically Azure, allows Samaritan Health to become quicker and more efficient in how we deploy new applications and enhancements, which is fantastic. You can actually read more about this specific case study in Microsoft Azure case studies, as it's featured as one of the early successes of moving Epic to Azure. I want to talk quickly about some of the benefits of moving. And I think this is something that Tyler mentioned. One of the things that people assume is that if you move your workload to a hyperscale environment, you can have some performance benefits. And as we just discussed in the Samaritan case study, that's absolutely true. As new processors and new storage capabilities come available in Azure, we can adopt it almost immediately. In traditional environments, we would typically invest over a 3 or 5 year cycle, and there's very little that we can do to change the performance of that infrastructure over that period since we've already made an investment. Adopting hyperscalers allows us to adapt better performance as it becomes available. The other thing that we can think of, obviously we can certainly think of increased scalability, being able to scale up as a benefit, but I think the ability to scale down is a benefit that isn't always highlighted. There are a lot of organizations that actually work in full capacity through normal working hours, but especially in clinic environments, like we discussed with Vancouver Clinic, would actually be able to shut down a lot of those resources and scale down dramatically, saving costs as well as allowing them to do some maintenance and other operational things adapted to cloud operations. So this scalability benefit can be huge. But the other trend that we've been noticing in healthcare is a lot of acquisitions and divestitures, and a lot of movement. And the reason for that is due to market share changes or through cost benefits, and the ability to have almost unbounded scalability in this regard allows them to actually build their infrastructure in a manner that makes the most sense to them without having to make a lot of capital changes. Speaking of security, we talked a little bit about this in terms of CRO environments. But one of the most important things as we create a digital platform for the future is making sure that we have a cohesive environment where we can integrate lots of different security features and make sure the entire environment is compliant with all the different regulations that are coming about. By creating a sound landing zone that is actually compliant with HIPAA, GDPR, high trust, and other requirements in healthcare allows us to have the confidence to build and add on additional applications quickly, as Sadi mentioned, in this cloud environment without having to go through a lot of the building aspects before we can get an application in place. We're also excited that by having a multiple zones of availability throughout the world with different cloud resources, we can create isolation and barriers, which can actually create additional security thresholds for all of us as well. So the cost benefits, in conclusion, between reducing capital expenditures, having more control over our costs, being able to scale down the environment when we don't need it, and being able to take advantage of specific discounts and credits from Azure are all benefits that we can leverage. All right, Jonathan, I'll turn it back over to you now.
Thank you, Austin. I greatly appreciate both of y'all's input. Fantastic information. Now we'll be jumping into our Q&A/frequently asked questions. Starting off, for cloud read-only, does an organization need to have a cloud footprint and/or experience?
No, that's a good question. And as I mentioned before, the cloud read-only is a really good first step for organizations to get that exposure to Azure. It's a net new environment that has very limited connectivity to any existing infrastructure. So a cloud read-only is a really good project just to give your technical team at your organization the opportunity to build and understand Azure at a manageable pace and without having to worry about affecting anything that's in production.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Next up, why should organizations consider moving Epic to the cloud?
Well, I'll take that. The reasons are different for every organization, but I think the common themes between all organizations is either it's a financial incentive, to be able to, as I mentioned, to be able to get rid of big capital expenditures, like what Samaritan Health was able to do, so you can convert it to a pay-as-you-go model on an OpEx basis. Another area would be performance and scalability. Especially in Epic environments, we are so accustomed to buying a large set of capital infrastructure, and we typically have to overbuy on day one so that we are typically buying 2 to 3 times what we need just to not only account for DR, but to account for additional growth. So being able to just buy what you need and to scale up as you go certainly makes a lot of sense. For others, it's a security concern. It's hard to actually keep up with all the security controls that we need to have. And the promise of being able to integrate all the security controls that are available in Azure, as well as bring other elements and make that part of your overall digital platform, might be what's appealing. So lots of different reasons for why people may consider it, but usually falls into one of those three buckets.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Next up, what is the ongoing effort required to maintain a cloud read-only?
Yeah, after the initial setup, which is about 8 weeks for start to end of the project, the ongoing maintenance is actually pretty low. You're really just doing OS and Epic patching on your servers. So making sure any servers that aren't powered on get powered on. You do the SUs or Windows or Red Hat patching that you need to, and then you turn off any servers that you turned on. For most organizations, it's really less than an hour a week.
That's incredible. Thank you for that. How long does cloud read-only activation take? What does the process look like?
Yeah, so the process begins by severing the mirror in the VPN connection from your on-prem to Azure. The reason being is that if you're under some kind of security incident, you don't want to have them have any possible way of getting into this Azure environment. And then turning on any servers that may have been turned off for capacity reasons. And then finally, making sure that those servers are available over the internet. The cloud read only is being accessed over the public internet, whether it be from a user's mobile device or from the web browser, uh, being that it's potential that the internal network is compromised. And so that total process of severing the VPN in the mirror, turning on any servers, and then making those servers accessible over the internet is generally 10 minutes.
Amazing turnaround time there. Thank you. Next question being, there was a distinction between CapEx and OpEx savings. What's the significance of that?
Yeah, so and this is, I think this is something that all industries have to look at, but it's specifically very pertinent in healthcare because we are accustomed to looking at large capital purchases as part of our overall planning, and and OpEx as being kind of the run rate. And the thought of actually being able to save on these capex, but having to add on the opex side can be a little scary for some organizations because, to some degree, capital is easy to plan for. You plan for a certain amount, make an investment as long as you can justify it. Now we have to do the reverse and then kind of be able to track the expenses that are going on with opex. I will say, though, there are some guardrails we can put in for both cost management so that we can make sure we can monitor it over time and make sure that the cost in the cloud space is what we had expected to be, and the optimization as well as efficiencies are there. So by putting in some of these guardrails into the cloud operations, we can ensure that the cost that we get out of it is what we expect from an OpEx perspective. But I think that the distinction is important because it's a reverse of what we're used to doing. We're used to investing in capital to save on OpEx. Now we're going to reduce or get rid of capital line items in our budget, but replace that with hopefully a lower cost OpEx over time.
Awesome. Thank you for that. How does the cost of DR in Azure compare to a traditional second data center?
Yeah, in general, the cost of having a DR in Azure tends to be lower depending on how many of the servers you're actually going to have on. We always recommend that organizations use a pilot light approach when applicable. So for those servers that you have a lot of for capacity, so your Hyperspace Web, your virtualization servers that you're actually going to be deploying the application with, you can have a lot of those off. You want to have at least 2 of each type on at all time to be able to monitor system accessibility. But by having the rest of them off for capacity reasons until needed, you can make a lot of savings. So it depends a little bit on your presentation layer, but in general, it's a lot cheaper.
Awesome. Thank you. And early in the presentation and just a moment ago with your previous answer, I heard the mention of savings with Azure hybrid benefits. What is that?
Yeah, hybrid benefits are something that Microsoft offers with their licensing program. So Azure offers Epic customers the option to use their existing Windows Server and SQL Server licenses on Azure in exchange for a lower rate. This allows Epic customers to maximize their investments and reduce their licensing costs. It does have some requirements for their current licensing in order to take advantage of it. So it does depend on their current enterprise agreement or enterprise subscription agreement. So it's something we'd have to look into. But if you qualify, it has the potential to have a pretty significant savings overall, about 20 to 30% on average.
Thanks so much for that answer. Next question being, when disaster recovery is running in Azure, are there any opportunities to run servers active to take advantage of these additional servers?
Yeah, it's the kind of question that it depends. When organizations are running in Azure as alternate production, most of the time we see it in active passive. However, there can be some cases where active is feasible. It really depends on where your organization is located and what your latency is to the Azure region that your alternate production is in. So, for example, having Hyperspace web servers in Azure communicate with the production ODB on-prem, probably isn't going to happen unless you have really, really good latency to the Azure data center, just because you don't want to adversely affect your exception rate, your performance for those users. However, things that are a little bit less latency sensitive, maybe your EPS print servers, maybe some interconnect, actually could be done active-active if you choose to, so that even those servers that are on all the time, you're still getting some benefits from it. So it's the kind of thing where it depends, but there are definitely opportunities to run certain applications active-active.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but not least, final question is, are there any incentives being offered by cloud providers to move Epic workloads to the cloud?
There are. Healthcare workloads are very strategic for most hyperscale organizations, and Azure is no exception. So Azure does offer Epic customers the opportunity to earn and redeem Azure credits, which can be used to pay for Azure services and other resources. So Azure resources are obtained through various programs and promotions, such as Azure for Healthcare, the Azure Migration Program, and in some cases, they may also be able to help offset the cost of implementation costs, such as those offered by Sapphire Health, based on your expected annual spend and commitment to Azure services. So lots of different opportunities for offsetting some of the costs with migrating Epic to Azure.
Sounds good. With that being our final question, that wraps up our Q&A. Thank you for everyone for the questions and to Tyler and Austin for the answers provided. Lastly, if anyone would like to learn more about the information provided, please reach out to info@sapphirehealth.org. From there,
Thank you.
that concludes our webinar. Thank you everyone so much for joining, and thank you again to Tyler and Austin for being able to join us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.